World War II history. A global crucible. The Second World War. A conflict so vast, so destructive, it reshaped the very fabric of our planet. For 6 years, from 1939 to 1945, the world was consumed by a fire that spanned continents and oceans. It was a war of ideologies, of empires, and of survival. It involved more than 30 countries, mobilized over 100 million military personnel, and resulted in an estimated 70 to 85 million deaths, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. Kindly stay tuned as we journey through the epic story of this global crucible. The spark. The seeds of World War II were sown in the bitter aftermath of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles of 1919 humiliated and crippled Germany, imposing massive reparations and stripping it of territory and pride. In this fertile ground of resentment and economic chaos, a new, virulent ideology took root: fascism. In Italy, Benito Mussolini dreamed of a new Roman Empire. In Japan, militarists sought to dominate Asia. But it was in Germany that the most potent threat emerged. Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party rose to power, promising to restore national glory. They preached a doctrine of racial purity, scapegoating Jews, Roma, and others for Germany's ills. The world, weary of war and mired in the Great Depression, was slow to react. Hitler boldly remilitarized the Rhineland, annexed Austria in the Anschluss, and demanded the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. The policy of appeasement, led by Britain and France, aimed to satisfy Hitler's demands to avoid war. It failed. The point of no return came on September 1st, 1939. At 4:45 a.m., German forces unleashed Blitzkrieg, lightning war, a devastating combination of fast-moving tanks and overwhelming air power, smashing into Poland. Britain and France had guaranteed polished sovereignty. On September 3rd, they declared war on Germany. The Second World War had begun. Blitzkrieg and the fall of Europe. The spring of 1940 was a season of shock and awe. In quick succession, Denmark and Norway fell. Then, Hitler turned his war machine west. The Maginot Line, France's mighty static defense, was brilliantly outflanked as German panzers surged through the impassable Ardennes forest, splitting the Allied armies in two. The British Expeditionary Force and thousands of French troops were trapped at the port of Dunkirk. In a desperate and miraculous operation, over 338,000 soldiers were evacuated across the English Channel by a flotilla of naval and civilian vessels. On June 22, 1940, France surrendered. Hitler danced a jig in the forest of Compiègne, in the very same railway carriage where Germany had surrendered in 1918. Now, only Britain stood alone against the Nazi tide. But in Britain, a new leader, Winston Churchill, had emerged, his voice a weapon of defiance. "We shall fight on the beaches," he vowed. "We shall never surrender." The stage was set for an aerial battle for national survival, the Battle of Britain. The war becomes global. In the skies over England, the young pilots of the Royal Air Force, the few, clashed with the German Luftwaffe. By October 1940, Britain had held firm. Hitler cancelled his planned invasion. But the war was about to explode across the globe. In Asia, Imperial Japan, seeking resources for its empire, was already at war with China. Now, it looked south. To cripple the only force that could stop them, the United States Pacific Fleet, Japan launched a surprise attack. On December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, Hundreds of Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In less than 2 hours, 8 battleships were damaged or sunk. Over 2,400 Americans were killed, and the U.S. Pacific Fleet was devastated. The next day, the United States entered the war, and the conflict was truly global. Simultaneously, Japanese forces stormed across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, achieving a string of stunning victories. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, were now at the peak of their power, controlling a massive portion of the globe. But in the depths of this darkness, the first major turning point was brewing on the frozen plains of the Soviet Union. Hitler had betrayed his pact with Stalin and invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. His armies advanced deep into Russia, but were halted at the gates of Moscow and Leningrad. The war in the East was fought with a unique brutality, accounting for an estimated 80% of all German military casualties throughout the war. The climactic battle came at Stalingrad, a city reduced to rubble, fought street by street, room by room. In February 1943, the entire German Sixth Army surrendered. It was the beginning of the end for Hitler's dreams of empire in the East. The tide turns. In the West, the Allies began their long, hard road back. Victories in North Africa, followed by the invasion of Sicily and Italy, opened a second front and knocked Mussolini from power. But the main effort, the largest amphibious invasion in history, was being planned in great secrecy. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Allies struck. Under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, over 156,000 Allied troops from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other nations landed on the beaches of Normandy, France. They faced a wall of German fortifications, mines, and machine guns. The cost was high, but the foothold was secured. After weeks of brutal fighting in the Norman hedgerows, the Allies broke out and began the liberation of Western Europe. Paris was freed in August. Hitler's last major offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, slowed the Allies, but ultimately failed, exhausting Germany's last reserves. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the American island-hopping campaign was relentlessly pushing Japan back. From Guadalcanal to Tarawa, Saipan to Iwo Jima, each bloody battle brought the Allies closer to the Japanese home islands. Endgame and legacy. By the spring of 1945, Germany was surrounded. From the east, the mighty Soviet Red Army advanced relentlessly toward Berlin, driven by vengeance. From the west, American and British troops pushed deep into German territory. On April 30th, with Soviet forces only blocks from his bunker, Adolf Hitler took his own life in Berlin. Just days later, on May 8, 1945, victory in Europe was proclaimed. The war in Europe had finally come to an end. But the war in the Pacific raged on, with an invasion of Japan projected to cost over 1 million Allied casualties. A secret American project, the Manhattan Project, had developed a weapon of unimaginable power: the atomic bomb. To force a swift end to the war and avoid a catastrophic invasion, President Harry S. Truman made the fateful decision to use it. On August 6, 1945, the bomber Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. In a single flash, the city was obliterated, and an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people were killed instantly. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. World War II was finally over. The cost of victory was almost beyond comprehension. The world lay in ruins. The human toll was staggering, over 50 million civilians dead, including 6 million Jews systematically murdered in the Holocaust. Cities from London to Tokyo were shattered. Economies were bankrupt. But from the ashes, a new world was born. The United Nations was established to prevent future conflicts. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, their rivalry soon defining the Cold War. The war accelerated the end of colonial empires and spurred technological revolutions, from jet engines to computers to nuclear energy. The Second World War was more than a series of battles. It was a defining chapter in human history, a story of profound darkness, but also of incredible courage, resilience, and sacrifice. Its lessons on the dangers of extremism, the price of freedom, and our shared humanity remain with us, a permanent legacy for all of humankind.